In other NHL news, New York Rangers star Artemi Panarin has taken a leave of absence from the team after a Russian newspaper reported allegedly he got into an altercation with an 18-year-old woman in Latvia 10 years ago. The report cites a claim made by Panarin's former KHL coach Andrei Nazarov. Panarin has been critical of Russian President Vladimir Putin, which the team believes could be behind this story coming out. This was released by the Rangers, this statement today. Artemi vehemently and unequivocally denies any and all allegations in this fabricated story. This is clearly an intimidation tactic being used against him for being outspoken on recent political events. Artemi is obviously shaken and concerned and will take some time away from the team. The Rangers fully support Artemi and will work with him to identify the source of these unfounded allegations. Joined by Isabelle Khurshudyan, Washington Post foreign correspondent in Moscow. Isabelle, what more can you tell us about how this story emerged?
Yeah, I think the big thing to look into is obviously the timing. This is coming on the heels of, Panarin putting out an Instagram message in support of Alexei Navalny, the main kind of Russian opposition figure here, who was poisoned in August by, what he says was a state-ordered attack. He recovered in Germany and then, returned in January and was immediately jailed upon his return to Russia. So, it's been a kind of heated time in Russia right now, a lot of political tension and discontent over how Navalny's been treated. And, Panarin even putting just an Instagram post saying freedom for Navalny is making quite a political statement. So I don't think that Andrei Nazarov, talking to a pro-Kremlin media outlet right now about, something that purportedly happened 10 years ago is a coincidence.
Yeah, I want to follow up on that from what the Rangers said in their statement. They say, quote, "This is clearly an intimidation tactic being used against Panarin for being outspoken on recent political events." That's in their statement. So, yeah, what do you make of this story?
Yeah, I think there's, some nuance here, right? It's a leap to say that this was Kremlin orchestrated, but I do think it has to do with his political views, certainly. I don't think Nazarov comes out with this story that has, a lot of pretty outrageous details, including, a 40,000 euro cash payment to Latvian police, as if it's that easy to take out 40,000 euros in cash at a random Latvian bank. I don't think that comes out if, Artemi hadn't been public in his political views. But I also don't know if it's fair to say at this point, based on what we know, that someone from the Kremlin called up Nazarov and told him to talk about this. It's entirely possible that Nazarov has his own vendetta against Panarin or just doesn't like his political views and kind of came out with this on his own. But I do think Panarin's being targeted for, what he said about Navalny and what he previously said about Putin. As far as this story goes, I don't think people found it entirely convincing or credible, but it's entirely possible that because he's been politically outspoken and he has said things about Putin in a past interview in 2019, that he kind of sees this as sort of an indicator of other threats. That, maybe he's worried about his family who still lives here. Maybe he thinks that there's more to come, stories like this, or maybe other things that he's worried about because he's been politically outspoken. And certainly, that's not unheard of in Russia for there to be kind of, retribution or response to kind of voicing your political beliefs.
How common is it for athletes to speak out against Russian leadership?
Yeah, it's super rare. I mean, I think it's more common for, you've seen players like Ovechkin and even Malkin, come out and support Putin. Ovechkin even kind of a couple of years ago started what he called the Putin team ahead of, the 2018 presidential elections. So that's sort of par for the course. It's incredibly rare for someone of Panarin's status, arguably the best Russian player in hockey, to kind of say what he has. I think back to an interview he did 2 years ago when, he said the mistake that Russians make is treating Putin like he's superhuman, that, there are alternatives to him. And so I think that's kind of when it started for him, when he kind of got on the radar as, maybe someone who was finding his political voice. And this was kind of a continuation of that.
Isabelle Khurshudyan of the Washington Post, thank you for this.
Thank you.
For more on this story, let's bring in Isabelle Khurshudyan, a foreign correspondent for the Washington Post, now based in Moscow. Isabelle, how do you think this story came about?
Yeah, I think we have to look at the timing. This is coming on the heels of Artemi Panarin posting, an Instagram message of support for the prominent opposition politician here, Alexei Navalny, who in August was poisoned by what he has said is a state-ordered attack on his life by President Vladimir Putin. He recovers in Germany for 5 months, comes back in January, and is immediately jailed upon his return, setting off protests here in a very politically tense time for Russia. So, Panarin kind of weighs in, just posts an Instagram picture of Navalny and, with the hashtag freedom for Navalny. And that alone, it's pretty small, but it's a pretty big political statement here. So I don't think Andrei Nazarov coming out with, an interview in a pro-Kremlin media outlet, about something that purportedly happened 10 years ago is a coincidence. I think that's linked to Panarin kind of finding his political voice and, showing support for Navalny.
What do you make of Panarin taking a leave of absence from the Rangers in the midst of all of this?
Yeah, this is just me speculating, but I'm guessing it doesn't have to do with just this story alone. As far as this story goes, I don't think people found it entirely convincing or credible, but it's entirely possible that because he's been politically outspoken and he has said things about Putin in a past interview in 2019, that he kind of sees this as sort of an indicator of other threats. That, maybe he's worried about his family who still lives here. Maybe he thinks that there's more to come, stories like this, or maybe other things that he's worried about because he's been politically outspoken. And certainly, that's not unheard of in Russia for there to be kind of, retribution or response to kind of voicing your political beliefs.
Isabelle, how common is it for athletes to speak out against the Russian leadership?
It's really rare, especially for someone of, Panarin's status, arguably the best Russian player in the world right now. We've seen athletes go the other way. Ovechkin, Malkin, they've started something called the Putin team, which, came out before the 2018 presidential elections in support of Vladimir Putin. But, for someone to kind of say what Panarin did, in the 2019 interview, he said the mistake Russians make is treating Putin like he's superhuman, that, there's an error in believing that there's no other alternatives. I mean, those are pretty harsh critiques for an athlete. And I think that's probably why he's a little spooked. It's because he's kind of on his own here. You don't really see it often. And Putin is someone who loves hockey a lot. So, the Kremlin is definitely taking notice, but I understand why he might be a little shaken.
Isabelle, we appreciate you taking the time and speaking with us. Thank you.
Thank you.